The night Nilo's life stopped belonging to him began with rain, the kind that fell without mercy, thick silver sheets swallowing the streets and blurring the neon glow of the city into something unreal. And he stood beneath the flickering awning outside his father's gambling den with his thin coat clutched tight around his shoulders, shivering not from cold, but from the suffocating certainty that something irreversible had already been decided inside those smoke-stained walls. Because men did not emerge from that place with relief on their faces, and his father had gone in smiling. He should have run then, before the black car arrived, before the door opened with silent precision, before the tall stranger stepped out. But Nilo had never been someone who ran, not from hunger, not from humiliation, not from the slow erosion of dignity that came from being born the wrong kind of Omega into a world that measured worth in heirs and bloodlines. And so he stayed where he was, watching the stranger approach through the rain with the unhurried certainty of someone accustomed to obedience. His dark coat, untouched by the storm, his gaze level and distant as if the world bent around him rather than the other way around. And when those eyes finally settled on Nilo, the air itself seemed to tighten. "You're coming with me," the man said, his voice low and even, not cruel, not kind, simply final. And before Nilo could ask anything, the door behind him burst open and his father stumbled out laughing, drunk on relief and cheap liquor, his breath sour as he clapped a hand onto Nilo's shoulder and pushed him forward with careless force, announcing in a voice loud enough for the street to hear that the settlement had been accepted, the debt erased, the family restored, and Nilo his useless, infertile Omega son was now the property of Lucien Vale. The word struck harder than any blow, because Nilo had always known he was worth little in his father's eyes, had grown up under the quiet condemnation reserved for Omegas who could never bear children, had watched other sons traded in marriage negotiations while he remained unwanted inventory. But knowing he was worthless and hearing himself sold were not the same thing, and the humiliation burned hot beneath his skin as he looked at the stranger Lucien waiting in the rain with the patience of someone who had already paid. Nilo's voice came out hoarse, and he said he couldn't give heirs, that the transaction made no sense, that his father had lied. But Lucien merely studied him for a long, unreadable moment, the rain sliding down sharp cheekbones and dark lashes without disturbing the stillness of his expression. And then, to Nilo's astonishment, a faint exhale left him, almost relief, as if some unseen burden had just lifted, and he replied that heirs were precisely what he did not require, that this arrangement served purposes far removed from fertility, and that Nilo would understand in time. There was no more discussion after that, because his father had already turned away. Debt he erased and conscience equally cleared, disappearing back into the den without a backward glance, leaving Nilo alone on the pavement with a man who had purchased his future. And in that moment the last fragile thread tying him to his old life snapped cleanly, replaced by the quiet certainty that whatever came next would not be chosen. The car door closed with a muted thud that sounded too much like finality, and as the city slid past in blurred streaks of light and shadow, Nilo sat rigid in the leather seat, hands clenched in his lap, acutely aware of the man beside him, whose presence filled the confined space with something heady and controlled, a restrained power that never needed displayed. And he realized with a creeping unease that Lucien had not once looked at him again, as though the acquisition had already been completed and required no further inspection. The penthouse rose above the city like a shard of glass, silent elevators carrying them upward into air that smelled faintly of steel and winter. And when the doors opened onto an expanse of dim light and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-drowned skyline, Nilo hesitated at the threshold, struck by the impossible distance between this place and the cramped rooms he had known, because wealth had a texture, a stillness, a kind of insulated quiet that swallowed sound and consequence alike. And stepping into it felt less like entering a home and more like crossing into a different world. Lucien removed his coat with efficient movements and draped it over a chair without ceremony, finally turning fully toward Nilo for the first time since the street. And under the worn, interior light his features were even more striking, severe lines softened only slightly by the dark fall of hair across his forehead, eyes deep and steady as if nothing in existence could surprise him. And Nilo felt suddenly, painfully aware of the dampness of his clothes, the cheapness of his shoes, the weight he did not belong in any space shaped by this man's life. "You may choose any room," Lucien said, as if assigning quarters to a guest rather than a purchased spouse. And Nilo stared at him, confusion colliding with dread because none of this resembled a fate he had imagined. There was no examination, no claim, No cruel satisfaction, only a measured distance that made him feel strangely more exposed than aggression would have, and the words tore free before he could stop them, that he was infertile, that no amount of money could change that if Lucien expected children he had been deceived. Silence followed, stretching long enough for Nilo's pulse to thunder in his ears, and then Lucien stepped closer, not invading, not touching, merely occupying the space between them with a gravity that made retreat impossible, and said quietly that he was aware that the settlement had been negotiated precisely on that basis, that Nilo's inability to conceive ensured there would be no heirs to complicate inheritance or family expectations, and that this, in fact, was the reason Lucien had agreed. The confession struck like cold water, dismantling every assumption Nilo had clung to in a desperate hope that misunderstanding might free him, and in its place came a more disorienting truth that he had not been chosen despite his infertility, because of it, valued for the very absence that had defined his rejection elsewhere, and the paradox left him unsteady, unsure whether to feel relief or dread at being wanted only in a role that required nothing of his body beyond presence. Lucien continued, voice calm, explaining that his grandmother demanded marriage, society demanded heirs, and neither demand suited him, but a contractual partner who could satisfy appearances without producing lineage solved both pressures. And in exchange, Nilo would receive residence, allowance, protection, and autonomy within clearly defined boundaries, a partnership in name, distance in practice, coexistence without obligation, and as the terms unfolded, precise and almost gentle in their restraint, Nilo realized with stunned disbelief that he was not expected to surrender himself at all. The agreement should have felt like salvation, it standing there beneath the vast windows with rain streaking the city below. Nilo sensed the deeper current beneath Lucien's composure, an intensity held tightly leashed, a watchfulness that missed nothing, and he understood instinctively that while this man might never demand love or heirs, he would demand loyalty, presence, permanence, and once given, those would not be easily withdrawn. A faint sound broke the tension then, a soft questioning mew from somewhere near the doorway, and both men turned as a small black kitten padded hesitantly across the polished floor, fur still damp from rain, green eyes wide and unafraid, as it approached Lucien with the fearless certainty animals sometimes possess toward those who hide gentleness beneath severity. And to Nilo's astonishment, the formidable man crouched, extending a hand that the kitten immediately butted its head against, purring as if it had always belonged there. I found it outside earlier, Lucien said, almost absently, stroking the tiny spine with careful fingers, and something in the scene this powerful, untouchable figure kneeling on marble to comfort a stray creature fractured the rigid terror inside Nilo, replacing it with a fragile, dangerous hope that perhaps the life awaiting him here would not be the cage he had imagined but something stranger, quieter, and far more binding. Lucien rose then, the kitten gathered securely in one arm, and met Nilo's gaze with a steadiness that felt less like scrutiny and more like decision, saying that arrangements would be formalized tomorrow, that Nilo need not fear expectations he could not meet, and that from this night onward he was under Lucien's protection, a statement delivered without flourish yet carrying a weight that settled irrevocably between them, because protection from a man like this was not temporary, not conditional, but absolute. And as thunder rolled distantly over the city and the rain continued its relentless fall beyond the glass, Nilo understood with quiet, inescapable clarity that he had been sold, not into captivity, but into something far more dangerous, a bond chosen in cold logic yet already threaded with an intensity neither of them fully acknowledged, and that the moment Lucien Vale had looked at him in the rain, his life had shifted onto a path from which there would be no return.